In the modern world, corporate and personal success is dependent on high-level innovative thinking. But how can high-level innovative thinking be developed? In order to answer that question, we need to first grasp how thought is even produced. To open a discussion, first requires basic understanding that thought comes from the brain-mind dynamic. Older models of this dynamic simply state that the physical brain is the mind. But this model is now outdated because it has become evident that the brain is tangible and the mind is conceptual. The latest model is that the brain creates the mind. But this model is incomplete and lacks the ability to address even the most elementary functions of how the mind works. So to continue, we must introduce a new model of the brain-mind dynamic. It is an advanced paradigm where the brain and mind are separate entities that interact together. In computer terminology, the physical brain is like an adaptive biological motherboard, while the mind is a separate operating system that runs the brain. We will now explain our mind model and focus specifically on the functions of the mind. Many of the concepts that will be presented are unprecedented, but we want you to be assured that the principles behind our mind model are valid because they are based on structured processes. In our explanation, we will use some terminology that you may not be familiar with or that need more context to be better understood. Let's take a moment to define some of these terms so that we're all on the same page. We'll start with the term that we just used of structured processes. From the atomic level to the physical level to the cosmological level, structured processes are what allow for multiple interacting components to work in coordination with each other. For example, a cell in the human body has around 10 main organelles which must all work in coordination for the cell to survive and function. And the human body has over 100 trillion cells that must also work through structured processes for the human body to survive and function. The mind also functions through structured processes and is comprised of multiple interacting components that work in coordination with each other. These interacting components include self, thought, emotion, and intuition. Let's take a moment to give a brief description of these distinct mind components. The self is the central component of the mind and is the entity allowing humans to be aware of their existence. The self is also the entity that you are aware of yourself to be when making decisions. Therefore, the self is you, the decision maker. We will group thought, emotion, and intuition together because their functions are similar in our mind model. These three mind components present choices to the self to select from and act upon. Thought presents ideas and concepts as choices. Emotion presents feelings and sensations as choices. Intuition presents visual and physiological influences as choices. These choices are like tools in a machine shop that the self can select from and use as needed. Our next term is incremental information. This describes a small amount of information that is sourced from the core of thought. It is expressed in the form of nascent ideas and concepts. Incremental information can be used like Lego blocks, connecting multiple pieces of information together. This building can be done either by an individual or collectively as a team. Either way, incremental information can be aggregated until it eventually is used to create incremental innovation in the form of improved products and services. Another form of information is breakthrough information. This information is distinctly different because it is disseminated from the core of thought in large amounts and is expressed in the form of comprehensive ideas and concepts. As an example, incremental information would be like the individual components of a bicycle, wheels, pedals, etc., while breakthrough information would be like the complete working bicycle. Therefore, breakthrough information has the potential for widespread use and synthesis across multiple fields. Breakthrough information can also be aggregated until it eventually is used to create breakthrough innovation in the form of radically different products and services that impact the very course of societal evolution. But both incremental and breakthrough information can only be sourced if there is a sufficient knowledge base from which they can be derived. The term knowledge base is a description of personally learned experiences that are assimilated into a memory bank that you can then use to understand the world around you. But in order for innovation to occur, an acceptable quantity and quality of information must be available as a sufficient knowledge base to be used as a resource. This is like a well-stocked library having a sufficient amount of books that can be used as a resource. Then, a sufficient knowledge base allows for both incremental and breakthrough information to be sourced through thought experiments. This last term of thought experiments is a description of a process where you are thinking about your thinking and then interacting with those thoughts. The first step in this process is to identify what you're thinking about so you can interact with it. Rather than simply accept this thought, the next step is to strategically analyze, cross-examine, and filter the thought that is presented to you. Only then can incremental and breakthrough information be sourced from the core of that thought. That means that all resulting incremental and breakthrough innovation begins with thought experiments. Now, let's use those newly defined terms to further expand on the mind model. Remember how earlier we gave a brief description of several distinct mind components of thought, emotion, and intuition? We are going to delve deeper into those and focus on the aspects of thought and emotion first. Let's start with thought. There are three distinct types of thought: rational, creative, and reactive. At the core of that thought are two different types of information. Rational thought contains old information that was attained through learning, so only old ideas and concepts can come from rational thought. But creative and reactive thought contains new information, so new ideas and concepts can come from creative and reactive thought. Now this is where emotion comes in. The old information from rational thought has no emotion attached to it, while the new information from creative and reactive thought always has emotion attached to it. Emotion has a range of extremes from fear to elation and every sensation in between. Emotion is also a catalyst for the force and transmission capacity of thought. So the more extreme the emotion, the more it increases the force and transmission capacity of thought. The end result of stronger emotion is that it has a stronger attraction of pulling you to interact with the thought that emotion is attached to. As you can see by the color coordination in the graph, rational thought is devoid of emotion. Therefore, it's slow, methodical, and lacks an attractive power. However, creative and reactive thought have emotion attached to them, producing an explosive, turbulent, and immediate attraction. That is why human history has so much drama, because humans mostly interact through creative and reactive thought. But don't be fooled by the seemingly boring nature of rational thought. Professionals that make the highest impact in society within fields of math, science, physics, engineering, and technology tend to use rational thought the most. As an example, projects such as designing bridges to be safer rely almost entirely on rational thought. Let's move on to intuition, the final component of the mind. Intuition also has emotion involved with it, but instead of emotion being attached, it is more accurate to describe intuition as being imbued with emotion. It's like whipped cream. Once you put sugar in whipped cream, you can't separate the two. Ultimately, intuition exists to guide individual behavior. But there are three aspects of how intuition works that we'll describe here. The first aspect of intuition functions by pulling and pushing you using visual and physiological influences. The visual influence comes from emotion-based images from the past, present, and envisioned future. For example, seeing an image of a green margarita can have intuition pull you into a past memory of a St. Patrick's Day when you were at a party and met this great girl or guy. That's the visual influence. The physiological influence comes from nervous system-based impressions, more commonly known as the senses that intuition imparts on you. For example, the involuntary reaction you had in your body at that party upon meeting the great girl or guy, along with the same reaction you have to remembering it. The second aspect of intuition achieves its guidance through the opposite duality motives of competition and cooperation. This opposite duality is a structured process like that of negative positive, contraction expansion, or reactive creative. As an example, the intuition of extreme competition can lead individuals into conflict and war, or intuition of extreme cooperation can lead those same individuals, without any outside assistance, to participate in a shared experience of starting a wave in a stadium. Now we can see the final mind model chart with all the color-coordinated emotions present, showing all of the mind components. The last aspect of intuition has to do with a concept that was touched on earlier of needing a sufficient knowledge base from which incremental and breakthrough information can be derived. If we continue the analogy of a knowledge base being like a library, then having missing gaps of vital books can make research on a particular topic impossible. So, when you notice your own knowledge base is insufficient, then intuition responds with images and physiological guidance on what steps to take to fill your knowledge base gaps. Once you show interest in that guidance, this initiates the involvement of creative and reactive thought, offering you choices in the form of specific ideas and concepts on how to execute that guidance. This intuitive guidance is therefore critical to the process of creating innovation. So it can be said that the advancement of the major fields of society is generated by incremental and breakthrough innovation, which is generated by incremental and breakthrough information, which is generated by thought experiments. This insight answers the original question we started out with, of how can high-level innovative thinking be developed? We have now established that thought experiments are what develop high-level innovative thinking. But furthermore, it is reasonable to speculate that thought experiments are the starting point for all societal evolution.